What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and we are going full circle. This is our first video that we are going to be doing for the NFL offseason, and this is actually exactly where we started last year, where we started the whole podcast. Everything has changed, if you couldn't tell by the background and everything. These videos have gotten a lot better. We've gotten a lot better in front of the camera. We're not sitting on the ground anymore like we were before. So it's been a really great year. But our first video that we did was off-season outlooks for these by division and for these teams, talking about cap space and draft picks and all these different things. Well, we're going to be starting it again. This is this is going to be the AFC South. We'll be talking about all the teams in the South, and I'm really excited because this is draft season. We talked about this last year. It's my favorite time of the year, so let's get after it.
Yeah, so we're going to start off with Tennessee Titans, who were able to get the number one pick after it was, switched hands back and forth a few times to end the season, but several upsets culminating with Tennessee finishing the season on a sour note. You actually witnessed the last game of the season, going to the cold in Tennessee, where they played the Texans, and that's what helped them clinch the number one pick, losing 6 straight to end the season. It helps them go in a good spot because, it's just kind of a roster. It has pieces on both sides, but it's just it feels incomplete. Once again, neither of us were on board with them parting ways with Mike Vrabel 2 seasons ago, or the previous offseason.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And we were just like, don't know if that's the right way to go. They end up going this year where Brian Callahan somehow stayed. Yeah. But OC changed, DC changed, new GM. So it feels like a new regime, and having the number one pick, they're going to be playing possum a lot because, yes, it's a weak quarterback class in general, but there's several teams up top that are going to be targeting quarterbacks, and they're one that definitely need a quarterback upgrade. Obviously, Will Levis did not make the most of his opportunity. He was benched at portions of the season for Mason Rudolph, who looked the exact same, essentially.
Right.
But they're a team that's kind of in flux because they have pieces where it's just like guys that are hitting their stride, hitting their prime in good spots. And they also have a slew of veterans like Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard that they paid a pretty penny for last season. They actually, were serviceable in their spots. So it's very kind of weird transition for them, but they have the resources to kind of turn it around, and it is the weakest division in football. That's not it's pretty much a coincidence that we are starting the offseason now with these 4 teams. Yeah. But it's really easy to me to all of a sudden turn around to be a 500 team in this division, and they have the resources, like I said, to do so.
Yeah, and just for some shout outs, their schedule for this whole division will be playing the AFC West as their opponents, so they're going to get all 4 games in the AFC West. Raiders, Chargers, Kansas City Chiefs, and Denver Broncos. And then just kind of going over some things on the board, of course, they have the first overall pick. That's how we do this. But what are they going to do with it? That's something we're going to be talking about the draft and stuff. Are they going to go with the quarterback, or are they going to go with the free agent quarterback in this slew of – there's a few free agents that are solid. You can go with the Kirk Cousins on a cheap deal and that kind of situation because we do hate this quarterback class. But at the same time, they might see something that we don't see or actually any analyst sees. So that's kind of the question mark. I think it makes the most sense to go with edge and get Abdul Carter if you have that opportunity. But I could see them going quarterback because it is the position – when a new head coach, new GM, all that stuff happens that you notice happening often in the draft. So,
well, yeah, the GM came out, said that they wouldn't pass up on a generational talent. And you're going to hear that quote all offseason as they kind of digress. But I think it really comes down to 2 players, and it's going to be Abdul Carter, which is the edge rusher, which is our number 1 player in this class. Yeah. Or what many people would think would be Shedeur. Cam Ward is probably getting way more buzz as being the first quarterback off the board, and they are the 2 heavy favorites to be the first pick in the draft. So it comes down to those 2 players, or if they do sell a king's ransom like Chicago did 2 years ago for Carolina to move up to Bryce Young, say a Raiders team gets desperate and wants to move up with new coaching and all that stuff.
Right.
If Cleveland is just like, hey, we're screwed, we might as well screw it up even more and give up a couple first rounders to do so. Maybe they do that as well. And I wouldn't fault them for moving back a couple of spots, still getting a pretty solid player, but also getting way more assets to go. And they have a decent amount of cap space as well to address several areas.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. Talking about some other things on our bullet points, there's just some things that, we have to kind of go over. And you alluded to a bunch of these different things that are already up here. But I think the thing that, kind of stands out to me is finishing second ranked total defense and second worst turnover differential. -16. Those, we got to get those things fixed and, kind of go from there. But their defensive line has been really good. I like Jeffrey Simmons. I like Devondre Sweat. He was one of our guys that we held much higher up than other people. People had him in the 80s and even in the 100s. And we said he was going to be a top 40s player. And he has been up to this point. So hopefully he continues doing that and things like that.
And Jeffrey Simmons, like you said, he's their best. Probably their best overall player right now. He's the only one that would have made an All-Pro team for the team. He had an injury-riddled 2023, but he bounced back in a big way this year. But again, like I said about Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard, they also invested heavily in the secondary, and there was some more injuries, which is why they kind of struggled for the most part. But like I said, they were one of the worst teams, and they somehow were the second total defense.
Yeah.
So that's a good sign. But O-line still work in progress. Peter Skoronski was a recent pick that is probably their best bright spot. And then they went with J.C. Latham as a surprise last year, which we didn't love. But it's just a bunch of young guys, but they were back-to-back seasons as the worst-ranked offensive line. Got up to 28, so it's at least you could only go up.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And they did, but it's still way below expectations, even for a new quarterback, whether they bring in a veteran or a new quarterback. That needs to be addressed to help them benefit and really make the most of what they have in Tennessee.
I think the best thing for them is to get some veteran offensive linemen, help those young guys. And then also, it does say up there, they had 32 sacks on the year, 30th, tied for 30th. While I was at that game, Harold Landry broke the record for sacks for the team, which was pretty cool.
Right.
But they definitely need to get better in that regard, and that comes to why I think Abdul Carter makes the most sense. So we'll see what they do. I love his versatility, though, to be able to stand up and do some things because they do run some 3-4. They run multiple defense, so changing things up. But 3-14 and not looking too hot. But there's other teams in this division itself that are just as bad or worse on paper, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, they just feel like a team that is not fully in rebuild, but they're just in transition.
Right.
And this could be a turnaround where they're 9-8 and competitive. They have one of the easier strengths of schedules. Obviously, that's unofficial, but because of a fourth place schedule, and on top of that being, I think they're 29th as of this tweet.
Yes.
But we didn't put this on the graphic, but. Decent schedule, easy division. There's an easy path to be a 9-8 non-playoff team, and it feels really good. But at the same time, that could be just a complete unknown and just like one-off essentially. And they just kind of go right back into the pits. It just kind of depends on how the moves that they make and what direction they want to go. But if they just heavily invest in free agency, which could be a possibility once again. I wouldn't be surprised if they became, very frisky in the AFC South.
I think that they could win some games that they're not supposed to next year, even with a subpar quarterback room. So going on to the next team, though, you got to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars next. They're 4-13 this year. We had much higher hopes for them. But one thing I do want to address is that they have some serious capital in the draft this year, which is big because this draft is not littered with first rounders. And we talk about first round talent being, guys that could be talented first round in any draft. There's not a bunch of guys in this draft that have that, maybe 12. We'll talk about that when we get closer, but and our big board stuff comes out. But they do have, this draft is deep, second, third rounders. And there's a bunch of them that are really good. So having these earlier picks, they could make some moves. They don't have a bunch of departures, as you can see up there. New coach, the new coaching staff has to be figured out, believe me, because we're just Doug Peterson.
They were this close to being a disastrous start to the offseason. Obviously, Liam Cohen was their plan A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And they kept the GM that has been there for multiple years and was not well regarded within circles that are close to the team, and they kept him throughout the head coach hiring process, and Liam Cohen almost pulled out and returned as an OC, and then at the very last second they released and fired the GM, got their guy, and then now it's just like, okay, now what are we going to do? Because this is probably the worst roster in the AFC South, but at least they have all the draft capital, like you said. We're looking at Tankathon's draft capital power rankings, and they are second. They're actually above Tennessee, who have the number 1 pick we just talked about. They're number 2 next to Cleveland, who we'll talk about in the AFC North video. But yeah, they have a ton of capital, but a ton of holes to address. There were bright spots. Obviously, Brian Thomas Jr.
Yes, of course.
In one of the deepest receiver classes, he was the guy to set records and franchise records in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Led all rookies in 2 of those 3 categories, which is a very, very impressive start to his career. But again, outside of that, it's a below-average offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of him, below-average receiving room, terrible secondary, below-average pass rushing, below-average linebacker core. So they're not really great anywhere. And on top of that, most of all, the biggest talking point is Trevor Lawrence, how we're just in wait-and-see mode. And at this point, it's kind of starting to get a little annoying on like, oh, no, it was just injuries last year. Oh, it was just bad coaching.
Right.
And I know he's going through another scheme change and another this, that, and the other, another injury season where he missed it the rest of the year for the second straight year due to injury. At some point, something's got to give, and you have to, live up to your billing. He's the only guy from that class still with his team. Obviously, we brought that up last year after Mac Jones was traded. But yeah, I mean, he needs to really, really have a big season next year. And honestly, it's probably even better if they go 5-12. But he has his 4,800 yards, 35 touchdowns, similar to a Joe Burrow this year, and then miss the playoffs, than him look okay, but they go 9-8 and somehow make it,
and lose in the first round,
exactly,
and not actually do anything.
Like
with
that would probably answer less questions than just, hey, this team sucks, but you balled out finally.
Yeah,
we've been waiting to see, kind of thing.
One thing I do love about this team is their defensive line. And I think it could get better in the draft, because I do think that the easiest pencil in for them is Mason Graham out of Michigan. And so I think that this defensive line is really fun. You have, of course, Trayvon Walker, who was the first overall pick a few years back. He has not lived up to it, but he is slowly building into the guy that, maybe a first rounder, warrants. And then Josh Hines-Allen. He's one of the better guys that we wish the Raiders would have got in that draft instead of Clelin Ferrell. So, I mean, I do enjoy that.
Walker finally had a breakout year as well. He got up to double-digit sacks, I believe, but still has not hit the level that Aiden Hutchinson, who was the other choice in that draft. Obviously, he was the defensive player of the year front runner before his injury for Detroit. But
a lot of one game.
A lot of areas. Yeah, we can go over to the side. Just hit some quick points before we move on. But obviously, address the Peterson getting fired. Cohen's in.
Right.
He's the OC for Tampa Bay. Again, injury play, but you just got to do some results, because it's just kind of like you're below average everywhere, and we need to start seeing your team win in spite of you, rather than just like, hey, blame it on X, Y, and Z.
Right, for sure. BTJ. I mean, it's just, I think that Jacksonville has a path to being good. It runs through Trevor Lawrence, right? Because I don't think Travis Etienne's bad. I know he didn't look good, but I don't think he's bad. I think their O-line could, get a couple pieces and be fine. Receiving core is, I'm glad that, Brian Thomas is there. Wish they wouldn't have paid Gabe Davis, but Evan Ingram's good. Christian, so they have pieces. It's just, can they put it together? And they just haven't been able to do that.
I think it's just like they have the resources and the ability to do so, but there's a couple more steps they have to take to kind of turn things around instead of like a Tennessee. But at the same time, if the quarterback that they have, like at the end of the day, that's the most important position.
Yeah.
So if that guy actually shows up like we think he should, that'll go a long ways in determining what direction they're going to go.
Right.
If he does not, it's going to be a very, very interesting offseason next year, because it'll be year 2, the biggest cap hit of his recent extension, and then it's just the boo birds and wondering if he's the guy, and then all of a sudden you won't have cap space, and then if it's another 6-11, 5-12 season, it's going to look a little rough.
No, I completely agree with that. Hopefully he can turn it around and play like a generational talent like he was supposed to be? Maybe not even that. Just how about just above average starter?
Exactly.
I mean, he is just average starter. Next team up is the Indianapolis Colts. They went 8-9 this year. Anthony Richardson, we were very off of on in this whole best ball season fantasy draft process. We weren't sure how good he is. I never thought he was that good because of his inefficiencies even in college. For the same exact reasons hasn't played well in the pros, he did in college. It wasn't like it was a surprise to anybody. We just thought because he was such a good athlete, he might be able to turn it around. Truly, he was probably a second-round grade and went way too early. But that is the biggest question mark on this team, in my personal opinion.
If you want to just see the glaring issue at hand, and we're just talking passer rating, so that doesn't take into account rushing and stuff like that.
Right.
But there's 36 quarterbacks that qualified for a passer rating among leaderboards.
Okay.
He was dead last at 36. 35th was a 79.4 QBR, which was Daniel Jones, who was released midseason. He was at 61.6.
That's embarrassing. Wow.
That is nearly 20 points lower than the next worst guy who was benched, and then Mac Jones, and then Jameis Winston, Gardner Minshew, all these guys that already retread quarterbacks. You are so much worse off them. And it's not like you have a bad offensive line. It's league average. You got a good running game. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor, he was injury plagued, but you saw the end of the year. He was the league winner if you had shares of him towards the end of the season. Receiving core, Alec Pierce is going for 150 yards with Joe Flacco. Josh Downs was having big games. Michael Porter Jr. was banged up, but we've seen him have success as like a, just safe threat.
Right.
And then A.D. Mitchell, I mean, we knew he was going to have a rough year just because of a lack of passing offense, but you have weapons, and it's not that you're not doing well. You are the worst, and mentality, all that stuff.
Yeah,
it doesn't. This team probably scares me the most is just because they just have nothing really to really build on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's not really we hit on this guy and that's our guy, other than like a Jonathan Taylor who you already paid, who is now the highest paid running back in football, which is just, not what you want to see going into a third year of a rookie contract.
Yeah, so we can talk about all this and whatnot, but I just want to put some numbers out there that are crazy to me. So I'm looking at PFF right now. I wanted to pull these up because I knew that it was going to be epic. So from the behind the line of scrimmage, a total of a 65.0 passing grade, and then short routes. He had a 32.3 to the right, 32.3. Okay. Center was 71.8, and then left was 49. That's awful. And then intermediate, 59, 58.6, and 48.5. They're all awful. All of those are awful. His deep grades are insane, though. 83.5, 71.3, and 89.7. He has better grades throwing the ball past 20 yards than he does throwing the ball 5 yards down the field.
Yep.
Because all he is a giant arm. And we have learned that. He can run and he can throw the ball deep. And everybody wanted to get on, the train because he could throw the ball 70 yards in the combine and stuff like that. Well, this is what he can do. You asked for it. Literally asked for it. And so here are the numbers for it. And I'm not making anything up. So it's crazy to see. And completion percentages are 46.9% from 10 yards to 19 yards. Like you can't play like that. You just can't. So that's Anthony Richardson in a nutshell, basically.
Yeah, at the end of the day, Shane Steichen is returning and Chris Ballard is still the GM, but it's like their jobs are riding on this season, and I just don't know how confident they are putting their entire fate and hands into him going into the next season. But it remains to be seen. They've been doing retread backup quarterbacks that are vets over, the last few years. Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, Gardner Minshew, and then last year Joe Flacco off the couch. And he plays better off the couch than Anthony Richardson, who's in his prime at 23 years old, does. And it just doesn't make sense. But we'll just kind of see what they do because there are a decent amount of veteran quarterbacks on the market.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to see. I actually brought up after, we have a friend for the Minnesota Vikings fan for Sam Darnold, and he was like wanting to re-sign Sam Darnold. And it's like, I don't know if you want to do that. And then obviously he has to lackluster into the season.
Right.
And then I was thinking to myself, like, okay, if not Minnesota, then who? And the first team I thought of was the Colts. And it's just because it's worst division, indoors, good skill groups, good run game, above average offensive line, slightly above average. They do have a couple of free agents. But it's just like I would see Sam Darnold walk in and instantly be
better.
Average.
Yeah, better than
what
Anthony
we
Richardson.
Saw. Yeah. Especially Anthony Richardson, but just he'll be better than a Joe Flacco or the recent retread 38-year-old backups that they've been trying to do.
Phillip Rivers. Since Andrew Luck, man.
Right. Yeah, it just feels like this team's been cursed on how they've been able to handle quarterbacks since, that whole debacle went down. And at this point, it's almost 8-9 years ago. I think it was 2016 when that happened.
Yeah, we were in college.
Yeah, but we'll just kind of see. I mean, they have resources, but it's just it doesn't feel – this feels the least optimistic of any of the four teams in the division. It's just basically because of the guys up top and just the lack of confidence in them figuring this all out.
No, I completely agree with that. It's just and we've been talking about it. I mean, Anthony Richardson scares me, but also at the end of it, like their defense is, getting older and things like that I'd like to see. And then they lose the leading tackler, and I'm thinking they're going to lose EJ Speed, who was the leading tackler in the league, I believe. Was it him or was it the other linebacker for them? Because it was one of them.
Zaire Franklin, I know, had a ton of tackles as well.
Yeah, both of them maybe by game.
Yeah, Zaire Franklin was number 3 in solo tackles, but he had 80 assisted tackles, so 173 combined tackles. And then, like you said, EJ Speed and Nick Cross, all of them in the top 7.
Yeah.
So they have good tacklers, but they were bottom 10 in both against the run and the pass.
Yeah,
there's not a lot they do well. I wish they'd ride more of Jonathan Taylor, but at the same time, he's also been banged up, so I understand why there's been kind of issues in just giving him the rock throughout the season, like we just saw with Saquon Barkley and the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, for sure. What's crazy is we're about to go to the Houston Texans, and they actually had also a down year. And we're talking Houston's 4-13. My bad. That's my bad. I'm changing it. I apologize. But Houston, of course, was better than 4-13. They were
basically the same. Yeah,
10-7
again. Won the division, 10 wins, won a playoff game as a dog, and then lost in the divisional round. Yeah,
they, in Houston, with Houston, they've been inconsistent because of their offensive line play mostly. To me, I think they just need to attack the offensive line in this class and either go in free agency and find a guy, veteran, and then, I don't know what they're going to do at tackle, but they need to go find somebody that can, slot in at right tackle and play for them, because right now they're having a hard time for sure.
Yeah, I mean they've it's not like they've done a lack of trying. They've tried to hit on guys like Kenyon Green, Titus Howard, and it just hasn't worked out. Laramie Tunsil, they made the highest paid offensive tackle in football, and while he grades out well, he also provides you with 19 penalties, which was by far the worst in the NFL. But he doesn't allow a ton of sacks. I don't know what you do with that.
Right.
His cap hit is the most on the team, if I remember correctly. And, I mean, he's good, but you can't be doing that when you're the highest paid offensive lineman. But, yeah, I mean, all across the board, they just kind of need some revitalized work. Offensively, doesn't sound like Tank Dell is going to be able to play, if at all, next year. Stephon Diggs, he voided his last few years, so he was on a contract year, and then he tore his ACL. So even if he's back, it's not what you think it would be. So definitely skill group position all of a sudden seems very, very thin. Nico did enjoy a breakout year, but he also was banged up this year. Defensive line, they have a couple of depth pieces, not like stars or studs that are hitting the market, but just you need to make sure you're sharing up the roster a little bit. They did a really good job just kind of overhauling it once they had the first year with D'Amico Ryans, and last year defensively was fine, but offensively it just seemed like something was just off, and that led to Bobby Slowick, who was the hot name as a head coach candidate last offseason, returned to Houston after all, and then they fired him. So all of a sudden they're moving with their first-time offensive coordinator, and we'll just kind of see where it goes because C.J. Stroud really took a step back.
Yeah, and I was going to say the right tackle for them is Blake Fisher. He was a rookie this last year. He was the opposite side of Joe Alt at Notre Dame. He didn't even make our top players, even our honorable mentions. So that's, and he got picked pretty early. And then the other guy, they're very young. What I was going to talk about is their defense being very young. Will Anderson on his original contract, Derek Stingley, who was basically a top 3 corner this year. Kamari Lassiter played great. But Kalen Bullock is their starting safety. And we were, I wasn't very high on him. And I was like, he has to go to the right situation and stuff. Well, he graded out as the 94th out of 98 safety. So kind of like, in the back end issues, Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson, sure, yeah, you have the best, possibly one of the best pass rush doers in the league. Fine. Like, that's great. But, to be consistent, you need some more just like level guys and average guys. And they had some issues. One of their starting defensive tackle, Fatou Kassi, was 116th out of 118. Yeah. Like, things like that. Just get average. Yeah. Like, just get average guys.
And also want to mention Jalen Petrie. Because he was having a Pro Bowl caliber year. He did go down with an injury. Missed, I think, 6 games. But just the epitome of this, I wish I had we could pull this in front of you guys. But I'm looking at their depth chart. And basically, if you're a free agent, pending free agent, you're either in black or green. They have one starter. Yeah. You mentioned Fatou Kassi, which, if you're going to lose a starter, that's the type of starter you're going to lose. That's the only defensive starter that is a pending free agent. However, they have 15 other defensive pieces that are backups. Mm-hmm. All of them are free agents. So, like I said, they're not losing the top guys, but they're losing all of their depth.
Yeah,
so they really have to really revitalize that. And obviously, they're going to have more than negative 900,000 in cap space. This is before people do restructures, and you have to get under the cap before the league year starts, right before free agency, which they'll find a way to do. They just kind of have to really hit on a bunch of defensive pieces, just because if some of these guys go down, all of a sudden you're really, really thin, and that's how you can kind of get exposed.
Yeah, depth. I mean, it's definitely. Let me go to the next page so we can check out the bullets. But there's some things that they're gonna have to fix because they might win the division next year again, and it wouldn't surprise anybody. But for them to actually make a run in the playoffs, they're going to need depth at defense, of course, like you just talked about. Receivers, offensive line has to get better. I'm happy Joe Mixon played well. So that was at least a good sight, but there's just some things that they have to fix if they want to actually make a push.
It feels like playoffs. Right now they're by themselves in their own tier in the AFC. Like, you have the big 3 or 4 with Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore, but then the next, it's like, okay, who's after that? And Houston, obviously, you had names like the Chargers and the Steelers. You saw them falter at the end, and on top of that, Houston dominating the Chargers the way they did in the wild card game. So it's kind of like they're just by themselves, and you don't really take them seriously as hey, they could really knock off one of those top 3 teams above.
Right, yeah.
But they're good enough to win their division and compete with everybody. But at the same time, Houston, that's kind of been the epitome of the good years since they've been over the last 10 or so years, is they get to be the 3rd or 4th best team in the AFC, and then they just lose close in the divisional round, and that's all she wrote. At some point, you got to break through with that because they are going to go in as a underdog against any of those teams I mentioned. But you got to get over the hump because they did outplay Kansas City. And I know it was on the road. And I know you want to bring up controversial calls. I don't care. At the end of the day, you did not get the job done.
You got to win the game. And I was going to say, CJ Stroud was like kind of checked off as like the KC killer. Mm-hmm. Like in his first year, they were like, oh, this is the guy that's finally going to be able to do it. And he was worse this year compared to a prior year. So it's just got to be more consistent. Win your division. That's first. But then after that, just finding ways to win in the playoffs. Maybe getting a home field advantage for once instead of being like, always the.
Can you host the second round?
Yeah, like
for once,
it'll be
instead of
huge.
Being the 3rd or 4th seed.
It'll be huge.
You play 3:30 on Saturday every wild card round.
Yes.
I want you to play at night.
Yeah.
Or something. Do something different. I just have a feeling that this team, because schedule wise, they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of strength of schedule. this just feels like another 9-10 win team that is going to win a playoff game and second round exit. And I hope that they aren't as predictable as that outlook seems.
Yeah, especially when we get to the beginning of the season, we like do our projections. Like, hopefully, we're like, oh, they went out and did this.
Yeah, because
they went out and did that.
In our opinion, they won the offseason last year, and it just really didn't seem like they did. There was very good spotty production in certain spots for all these guys that they brought in.
Yeah,
but they just couldn't put the whole piece together. And I know there was injuries, but at the same time, everybody had injuries. So you can win the offseason, but you still got to put the product on the field. Houston, you're the team to beat. You might be one of the biggest favorites to win your own division going into next year. But again, that should not be the goal or expectation. You need to shoot for more than that because, like I said, you're in a tier by yourself. Jump into that top tier.
2 years ago, they made it to the second round and lost.
2 years ago, they were the second overall pick. And then last year, they were...
that was 3 years ago. Yeah, that's what I meant. So 2 years ago, they made it to the second round and lost, just like this year.
Yes.
So, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we got to do better than that. That's, like, that
They were home dog against Cleveland, who had the number one defense.
Oh, that's
they
right.
blew them out, and then against Baltimore on the road, didn't get the job done. And this year, kind of the same result. You were home dog against a pretty good team and blew them out. And then the next round, just...
I would hate to play in the AFC.
Yeah.
Because it's like... You know who's going to do it. It's going to be the top three teams, KC, Buffalo, Baltimore, and probably Cincinnati. We had Cincinnati doing really well. They did really well offensively. But, so it's really hard to play in that side of the bracket, man.
Yeah,
but
I think some of these quarterbacks really need to I hope they end up in the NFC because it's so stacked that you're going to have multiple of these guys who are so talented that are going to be a footnote in their careers because they just were the sixth best in their own conference, and you never did anything with that. Whereas you have lesser guys in the NFC that are just going to be able to thrive. And
Jared
win
Goff
Super Bowls.
was the NFC. He was an All-Pro for the NFC. So I mean, there you go. Like, and I don't think Jared Goff could be a top 5 quarterback in the AFC.
Exactly.
So I completely agree with that. Let me stop sharing.
But yeah, that's a AFC South wrap-up.
Yeah.
We appreciate you guys tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Follow us on this journey through year 2 as we attack the offseason. This is our first of many attacking each division, just showing the outlooks of each of the teams. Give a broad reaction, and then we have a whole lot of content to react to this offseason on top of that draft season. It is really about to get underway.
Yeah, it's that time. We draft started in Mobile, Alabama, and it's going to continue. We're going to put our combine starts at the end of this month, so we're going to be putting out our big board top 50, and then right before the draft, we're going to do our top 100. We're also going to be doing our mock draft coming up a couple weeks for our first mock draft, so lots of things going on. Very excited, and we'll get it all out to y'all when it comes out, and hopefully y'all can react and enjoy it, and like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah.
So
we appreciate you guys tuning in. We will see you guys next time.